Welcome to the second hour of our program. On the line with us is our buddy Phil Ittner, the veteran war correspondent based out of Kyiv, Ukraine. His YouTube video blog you can watch, and I recommend you subscribe to it. It's just plug his name in, Philip Ittner, Philip Ittner. Ittner Philip is his Twitter handle, unless he's recovered his original one. Phil, did you get that back, or is it still long gone?
No, I think that's lost.
Okay.
I think that's long gone, unfortunately.
All right. So yesterday, the Chuck Schumer put forward a proposal to fund military aid to both Israel and Ukraine, and the Republicans demanded some pretty outrageous stuff with regard to the southern border. I mean, stuff that even hardcore anti-immigration Democrats wouldn't go along with. It was a poison pill, basically. And so the Republicans refused to even allow a debate on the topic of aid to Ukraine. How is this news being taken in Ukraine?
Well, Tom, as you can imagine, not well. There's been a longstanding frustration with the drip of equipment and supplies, just enough to kind of keep Ukraine fighting, but not enough. This is the argument I hear constantly here, but not enough for them to achieve victory. That it's never quite enough. There's always this debate. And so the decision to tie it to the southern border, it's interesting, Ukrainians study American domestic, policy and politics as much as, I've seen one nation study another nation's internal machinations, in the 30 years I've been doing journalism. They know exactly what's going on. Yeah. They know exactly that this is a domestic issue within the United States and has less to do with them than the struggle between the GOP and the Democrats. That doesn't soothe things. They're still losing people on a daily basis. People are dying and fighting, and we're still under threat from attack and all the rest of it. But they do recognize that this is domestic and not. I
think it's worse than that, Phil. I think that Vladimir Putin has told Donald Trump, stop the aid to Ukraine, and Donald Trump is telling Republicans, stop the aid to Ukraine. And I think it's all happening on the down low QT, and I'm just shocked and horrified that no American media, and frankly no Democratic politicians, to the best of my knowledge, are willing to say out loud what I just said.
Oh, and I don't think it's just Donald Trump, though, Tom. I think that there are a lot of people within the GOP. I mean, we know that the GRU, the Russian intelligence services, we infiltrated the NRA. I mean, this is a constant battle, and I'm glad that you said that, because about 3 weeks ago, maybe a month, perhaps, the head of military intelligence here, General Budanov, came out and said, the Russians have transitioned in their tactics. We have information that their intent is less to do with what they did last winter, trying to knock out electricity and heating and that sort of thing and make it unbearable for the Ukrainians to sustain themselves. That clearly didn't work. And so Budanov, the Ukrainian intelligence officer, said, we have people inside Russia telling us that their tactic this winter is to divide alliances, to create political chaos in every major donor country, but also between Ukraine and the West, and also to create friction between elements internally. In other words, the Russians are transitioning from a kinetic war trying to take out electricity and heating, although the battlefield is still fierce, but they are transitioning to information warfare. Right. And their primary attack is to divide and conquer. And so whoever they have compromat, or whoever they've been lining the pockets of politicians, not only in the United States, but particularly in the United States, clearly, and also I would argue Great Britain, we have to be on our guard from this, because the Russians realize that they can't beat us militarily, but they can set us against one another. They can degrade our democracy. They can create friction. They can line those pockets and make people vote the way they want them to vote.
They did it in 2016.
We need to be on guard. They sure did, without a doubt. And hopefully one day that full story will come out because the Mueller report was stymied by obstruction. I mean, if you go back to the Mueller report itself, aside from what happened when it came out and Bill Barr, doing his
Lies about it.
gamesmanship there, right? But if you look at the actual report, what Mueller says is that we couldn't do our report because we were obstructed at least 10 separate times, and we weren't able to find out what really happened in 16. I contend, having watched Russian interference in election and politics throughout Europe, and you can see their modus operandi. If you start to get the codex, you can see it, and the petri dish that they used in places like Estonia and here in Ukraine, how they can manipulate things with social media, with getting, with bribery and compromise and basically espionage and information warfare. They're extremely good at it, and they are bringing it to bear in the United States and in the Western Alliance. We really need to pay better attention to this. So what happened yesterday was bad, but I fear it is only the beginning of a trend that we're going to see in coming days, especially obviously as we go into election, the election period. The Russians are going to come at us real hard with information warfare.
Yeah, and already are. As I said, they did in 2016, and Paul Manafort, who had taken millions of dollars from Putin-aligned oligarchs, was handing
There's
to
a
Russia.
great interview. There's a great interview on the Kiev Post. As much as I don't, but kudos where kudos is deserved. They had an interview yesterday that they released with Lev Parnas. Lev Parnas, of course, very controversial figure, Ukrainian American involved in the Trump world, was kind of the go-between between Giuliani here with the whole Hunter Biden laptop and all the rest of it. In this interview with the Kiev Post, if you look it up, he says Giuliani knew that he was working with Russians, that they were Russian agents in Ukraine, doing the GRU's dirty work and working for the Kremlin, and yet Giuliani proceeded. Now, if that isn't direct interference in our elections in 2016, I don't know what is. And then, of course, you mentioned Manafort and all the rest of it. Yeah. We got to be better with this. We really do. We got to recognize. We got to recognize we're in an information war as much as a kinetic, real shooting war. That we are backing here, where Ukrainians are dying. But yes, we will be putting up that money eventually. There will be support because, Tom, I am in contact with a variety of delegations that are currently on the Hill. And the really sad thing about it is they're hearing from both sides of the aisle. Everybody recognizes the security importance of it, with some very glaring exceptions. But because of this domestic gamesmanship about the border, there's all this other stuff going on. But I do know that there are Ukrainian delegations on the Hill right now, behind closed doors, talking to people, and at some point there is hope that more funding and support will come this way, because this is the front line. I just watched The Darkest Hour, that wonderful movie about Winston Churchill, and those moments when Great Britain stood alone against Nazi. And this is not being overly dramatic. This is the front line between Russia's autocracy. If they win here, there will be grave ramifications for the Western world. First Europe, and then the transatlantic alliance. Yep. Russia intends to send and to spread the cancer that it spreads with corruption and with malfeasance on the global stage. And if they aren't stopped here, mark my words, it will get worse. And I think General Milley was perfectly correct when he spoke to 60 Minutes, about a month ago, roughly, when he said, if we don't stop them here, we're going to have to ratchet up our defense spending. Now, nobody really wants that, right? But if the border, if the front line moves from Ukraine to Poland or to the Baltic states, everybody's going to have to start to ratchet up their military spending. This is where it has to stop. This has to be the red line. And so we're getting more weapons here. There's positive developments happening on the front lines when we look at what's happening with crossing over to the other side of the river. The Ukrainian forces have now gotten across the Dnieper River, and their foothold there is growing and solidifying. This idea that the counteroffensive failed is I think, well, in my humble opinion, is not accurate because it hasn't stopped. They're gonna fight through the winter. This isn't constrained to a spring counteroffensive. Yes, they've had to kind of slow things down during the transition period of seasons, but ultimately they're going to fight this war during the winter. They've said just as much here in Kiev, and the military leadership fully intends to keep pushing. And if they can just make it another 60, roughly 70 miles, they will seriously put at risk the land bridge that supports Crimea and therefore Sevastopol, which so much of this war is about. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. No Russian leader survives losing what Catherine the Great took, betraying the dream of Peter with Russia as a major naval power, and access to the Mediterranean and a warm water port, which Russia has aspired to for centuries. This will put, when there are Ukrainian boots on the Sea of Azov, thereby splitting the land bridge, supporting the peninsula, there's going to be very major repercussions in Moscow. We already know Putin isn't in the Kremlin right now because he's afraid of his stability. We know that. We know that he thinks it's not safe in Moscow anymore. And if that land bridge gets cut off, it's one thing to lose hundreds of, this is a very cynical thing to say about Russia, but I lived in Russia. I've studied Russia for 25 years. It's one thing to lose hundreds of thousands of soldiers on the front lines. It's another to lose this sense of empire and power and pride. They already have a deep feeling of a betrayal at the collapse of the Soviet Union. To lose further what not only the Soviet Union had, but the Russian Empire had, Vladimir Putin is going to be in a very dangerous and precarious spot if the Ukrainians can get to the sea, and I believe they can, but we need to support them.
Amen. Phil Ittner, check out his video blog over on YouTube. Phil, thanks so much for dropping by.
Thank you, Tom.
It's always great getting these regular reports from you. I do appreciate it. We'll be back with more of the news of the day, our super hypocrite alert, the GOP also blocking the assault weapon ban. I'll tell you about that after this break.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Speaking the truth, the multinational corporations would really rather you know nothing about. I'll be right back.